going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here to talk to you about Superman and the Authority by Grant Morrison, Mikhail Janin, and Jordi Belair. The premise of this book is that Superman his powers are starting to weaken, and he wants to put together a team to protect the world and make the world a better place in his absence. And if that premise sounds a little bit familiar to you, it's probably because you are familiar with this story, All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. A story where Superman is dying, and he wants to make sure the world is in good hands in his absence. We have seen the premise of this book before. It is handled very differently here. All-Star Superman feels very Silver Age. It's not exclusively Silver Age. It does have other elements in it. Steve Lombard is in All-Star Superman, and I believe Doomsday is briefly referenced in that book. So it is a synthesis of all of the best elements of Superman from every era. But by and large, All-Star feels very Silver Age. This book does not feel very Silver Age. It feels very Dark Ages. Like, this world sucks, and Superman realizes that he could have done a better job of improving the world, and he failed. And now, this is his one last chance to try and make a difference. And this is Superman operating in a world that doesn't feel as joyful and jolly as the Silver Age does. And a lot of people, they kind of complain, oh, Superman is boring, he's way too powerful, how can you tell stories about someone who can move mountains? And Kurt Busiek famously said, tell stories where the solution isn't the ability to move mountains. Tell stories about Superman unable to do something, and then he has to try and think his way around a problem that doesn't require his superpowers as the solution. And this story, where Superman's powers are weakening, it does that. Even though his powers he's not able to fly anymore, he's able to hover, like, briefly off the ground, but he is back to, like, closer to his golden age power levels, where he can jump really high and he's really strong, but he's not unkillable. Even though this story does weaken him, it is still going in that direction of, this is a Superman who is having to think outside the box. He is trying to find a solution to his problems that does not require his strength to solve these problems. And I like that. I think that Grant Morrison has a really great handle on Superman. Even when when they are writing very different versions of Superman, you look at both of these books, which have a very similar premise, and then you look at Action Comics from the New 52. Out of everything that I read from the New 52, I would say Morrison and Rag Morales, their Action Comics run was probably, I didn't read the whole run, I read the first volume, that was probably some of my favorite stuff from the New 52. I really like the idea that when Superman first shows up on the scene, he is not immediately all smiles and clean cut, and he's telling kids to drink your milk, and he's rescuing cats from trees. That's not immediately what Superman is doing when he first arrives on the scene. When he first arrives on the scene, he's a little bit reactionary, and he's willing to get his hands dirty, and he's not necessarily going to look like the good guy. He is trying to do good, but he's a little bit hot-headed, and he's a little bit more fists and not so much smiles and kind-hearted goodness. It's hard to explain, but the Superman in the New 52 by Morrison and Morales feels very different from the Superman that you would have seen in the comics 1 or 2 years earlier, but it feels very true to the Superman of the Golden Age, the first year or so of Siegel and Schuster. And that Superman feels a lot more like this Superman. This is a Superman, he's not brand new, he's been doing this for a while, but because he realizes that the world is awful and I could have done a better job of fixing it, and now I have one more chance, he's a little bit more YOLO than what he usually is portrayed as. And he says, you know what, if I only have one more chance, I'm not going to necessarily play by the rules. And so this is a Superman who is willing to recruit a terrorist into his team to help him make the world a better place. And I think that is a fascinating idea. Unfortunately, this book is only 4 issues long, and it feels like Act 1 in a larger story that we are never going to get. And this is where basically I'm very unfamiliar with DC Comics these days. I was kind of trying to keep up with DC around like 2016 when they were doing Rebirth for the entire DC universe, and I kind of lost lost track of the DC Universe around that time. So I have no idea what is going on with the DC Universe. And I couldn't tell if this is supposed to be kind of an alternate universe story that you can read on its own, sort of like All-Star Superman, or if this is supposed to be set in the DC Universe. Superman keeps mentioning his son. He keeps saying, like, my son is going to be a better Superman than I am, and that is a reference to John Kent, who was brought into the DC Universe with Superman Rebirth 2016, and then a few years later, he was aged up and he became the new Superman, and then Clark had gone into space, and in Philip Kennedy Johnson's Superman run, he is trying to rescue Warworld, and at the end of this book, Superman tells his newly formed team, the Authority, I said that I was going to recruit you guys to fix the world. I didn't say which world. And he says, we're going to Warworld. And so this feels like, okay, maybe it is set in the DC Universe. Except at the very beginning of the book, we see Superman talking with John F. Kennedy in 1962. And John F. Kennedy tells Superman, I want you to promise to make the world a better place. And Superman says, you have my word. And then we jump to the present day, where Superman realizes he failed in his promise, and that is what spurns him into putting together this team. And that has its roots in Dan DiDio, when he wasn't the editor-in-chief, but he was something very high up at DC. He had this idea called 5G, I think, which is like 5 generations. There have been 5 generations of superheroes over the years, and we are currently in the 5th generation. And that idea never really took off. Dan DiDio was fired, and I think there was some behind-the-scenes drama where some people didn't actually want to see that 5G thing take off. I heard a rumor somewhere, I don't know how true this is, that Tom Taylor's deceased, that the whole reason that story exists is because Tom Taylor pushed it forward to try and delay that 5G thing from happening. I don't know how true this is, because my understanding is Tom Taylor is just a writer, and he didn't have editorial power to shoot down an idea that Dan DiDio had, so I don't know how true this is, but it looks like once Dan DiDio left DC, or was told to leave, that this 5G thing never really happened. But I think this idea that Superman was around during the Kennedy administration, that is a holdover from the 5G idea. And so if you're reading this, you might be a little confused. Wait a minute, Superman was around 60 years ago, and he's around now, and he's married to Lois, and he has a kid, and if you were like me, and this is the first Superman book you've read in like 5 years, and then you're saying, hang on a second, so Superman does have a kid. Maybe you haven't read any Superman before. Maybe you are familiar with Grant Morrison, and then you see this in your bookstore and you read it. Superman has a kid? I'd like to see him. He doesn't show up in this book. So there are things in this that don't make a whole lot of sense to me. Early on in the book, the Ultra Humanite, he talks about how there's this big lie about kryptonite, the great lie about kryptonite. And at one point later on in the book, he mentions the great lie about kryptonite. I have no idea what it is. Superman tells Lois he and Supergirl discovered something about kryptonite. I have no idea if this is a reference to something that was happening in the Supergirl series, or if this is just something Morrison threw in there, and then it's just there to kind of make you interested in reading more stuff with this status quo. I have no idea. A lot of this, I feel like, is set up for stuff that is not going to get a payoff. At the very, very end of the book, Superman is putting on his more traditional costume, and he's talking to Manchester Black, and then he shows Manchester Black the source from Jack Kirby's Fourth World, and on the wall there is writing that says Light Ray is. Now Light Ray is one of the members of Superman's team. She, in the 1990s, there was this alternate universe from DC called Tangent Comics, and Light Ray was basically the Flash from that world, and Light Ray is one of the last members of this team recruited, and I know almost nothing about her, and that is part of the problem of this only being a 4-issue miniseries, and it takes 4 issues for Superman to recruit the entire team, so we don't really get to see the team interacting with each other very much. We get to see a lot more of Manchester Black and Natasha Irons, Steel. We get to see a lot more of them than we do OMAC and Light Ray, who barely show up in this book at all. And if Light Ray is so important, at the end of the book, Superman says Light Ray is the most important member of the team, and she is the reason that the team was put together. I'd like to know why. Now, at the end of the book, it does say that this is continued in Philip Kennedy Johnson's Superman run, where Superman goes to Warworld. And I haven't read any of that, but I'm assuming that Superman brings this version of the Authority with him to Warworld. That's cool, but does Philip Kennedy Johnson have any inclination to pick up on this Light Ray is subplot? Does Philip Kennedy Johnson have any inclination to pick up on the lie about kryptonite, or Superman existing in the 1960s? This book feels like it's setting up stuff, and I don't know if other writers are going to pick up these subplots. And I'm not even sure when this book was first being conceived, and Morrison and Janin were coming up with the idea of Superman talking with John F. Kennedy. I am not convinced that they knew that they were going to say, to be continued in some other person's Superman comic. I don't know if that was what they were planning. I really wish that this book had been as long as All-Star Superman. I wish we could have seen a lot of this team working together. I would have loved to have seen Manchester Black interacting with Steel a little bit more. I would have loved to have seen Enchantress doing more stuff. And Light Ray and OMAC. We barely get to see them. Apollo and Midnighter are in it a little bit, and their interpretation by Morrison, it feels very different than what Warren Ellis and Mark Millar were doing 20 years ago, and that's fine. Characters grow and change, but because the characters feel, to me anyway, they feel a little different than they did in the early 21st century, I would have liked to have seen more of this interpretation of them. If you're going to play them differently than what they used to be written as, I'd like to see you do something with those characters. So, unfortunately, this book didn't really grab me the way I thought it would. I absolutely love the concept, and if somebody else, my understanding is Morrison does not plan to do any more with DC Comics. If somebody else wants to come in and pick up this team and do a story of Superman and the Authority, I would be there in a heartbeat. I would love to see Superman not necessarily playing by the daytime rules. We're going to have a team that operates at night, and we're going to be breaking into evil factories and stopping the bad guys from doing stuff, and we're going to be kind of clandestine about it. I'd love to see more of that. Unfortunately, this whole book is an origin story for the team, and then it ends, and then we don't get to actually see the team in action. I would have loved to have seen maybe they could have had all the team gets put together before the events of issue 1, and we could have seen some adventures that the team is going on, and maybe you would say that's not important. What's important is the character interactions along the way. I agree with you. Unfortunately, we don't get to see a lot of those character interactions. We get the first issue is almost all Superman trying to convince Manchester Black to work with him, and that's fantastic. I love that. I'd love to see more of that. I think this is something, if this was a longer run, if this was like 30 or 40 issues long, I think Manchester Black could have become one of my favorite Superman characters, with his very bleak, sour look on the world, compared to even this version of Superman being much more optimistic. I'd love to see a lot of their dichotomy, and Manchester Black kind of being redeemed from the borderline villain that he used to be. I'd love to see that. Unfortunately, this starts, and then before you know it, it's over, and then somebody else is maybe going to use this team. I'm not aware of how much of a role this version of the Authority played in the Philip Kennedy Johnson Superman run, but I have a feeling not as big as what I would like. We get to see Brainiac a little bit, and the design here is really awesome. Unfortunately, he's in like 3 pages of this book. Ultra Humanite is here. There is someone who works for the Ultra Humanite, and the reason they're working for the Ultra Humanite is they are from a place called Haven. I have no idea what Haven is. I looked up DC Comics Haven, and there was a Justice League miniseries from like 20 years ago called Justice League Haven. I have a feeling that's not what this book is referencing, and Superman and Natasha Yarns both say, we failed Haven. We are going to do what we can for Haven. What's Haven? Please tell me what's going on. You have someone like me, I know some stuff about Superman. There are probably other people who know even less about Superman. If they read this, they're probably going to be very confused. I know I was, and I know some stuff about Superman. So I shouldn't have to get a master's degree in comics to figure out what's going on here. I hate that I'm saying that. This is not new reader friendly at all. And I wish it was. The premise here is fantastic. I'd love to see this premise explored a little heavier, but unfortunately, this just didn't work for me like I wanted it to. So those are my thoughts on Superman and the Authority. I hope you guys liked this review, and if not, or if so, I will see you guys in the future with more videos. In the meantime, have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.